As a subject, yoga is concerned with the way the mind functions, with our perception of the world. As a practice, the details that each school of thought and the various practices that they follow evolve out of that basic principle, questioning or looking at perception. How do we know what we know? How do we understand the world? When you and I look out at the world, we don't see the same thing. You experience the world through the lens both of your past, but also of how you understand and you focus on various points and references. I, out of my past, notice other things. And at different times, we both stand and look at the same view and we notice different things. We perceive the world through the lens of our past and through the citta. We recognize in yoga the kleshas and the vrittis, the afflictions or the sufferings and the movements or modifications. That underpinning brings us into a practice world where we look at the way we perceive. And what Iyengar did, and what I really think he brought to the subject, is he made the subject practical. Every time you do an asana, you experience it in the tissue, but you also perceive it. You receive messages from your body, and how those messages are interpreted or understood reflects something of the consciousness. In yoga, we use our methodology to uncover the perceptual element. And here in the Institute, we apply 4 methods: technique, timing, sequence, and repetition. These are our tools to gain knowledge from experience. Because there are other forms. We can gain knowledge from the intellect. We can think about things. We can read things. But in yoga, this has very limited value, because what we read is also filtered through perception. How do we make sense of the world? How do we understand what is enduring and what is passing? And it's our methods that help us in this area. Technique, timing, sequence, and repetition. Technique, more or less. Timing, longer or shorter. Sequence, the order in which asanas are put together. And repetition, coming again and again. It's common for students to think about a classroom and the learning model as being one in which you need to be taught the details. But what if you'd heard all the details? What if you'd heard everything I have to say about Trikonasana? Would you know Trikonasana? And at that point, methods become significant. What if instead of having more and more detail, what if it was about studying your own experience and your own perception? More technique is not necessarily more asana. And more technique cannot be studying your own experience. Instead, overriding what you experience with these idealized instructions. So it's not uncommon when I teach that there may be asanas where there is no instruction. And maybe you hear those spaces as being an absence. But for me, they're a space in which your experience is valid. And my role over time is to make you handle the practice, What if we gave you an asana and then we asked you to handle it, to go again, to handle it from this angle, from that angle? What if you were made to do it this way or that way? And so it's said that over time, we come to understand through experience. It is the experience of the object in which knowing is gained or knowledge is gained. We do not merely apply technique. And at some point, I often think technique becomes an obstacle. If every time you do an asana, you have to break it down into its minutiae, then you're not ever in the experience itself. And for this, sequence is ideal. What if we did a sequence? And what if in that sequence you observed your experience? How poses change, or the feeling of poses change? And what if timing were not just a question of endurance? How long can you stay? How long can you endure? But what if you had to shorten the times, for example? And out of that, you noticed how much you like to engage and adjust and refine, and that short timings irritate you. What if what you learned was that you like detail? And what if, in the practice, you had to let go of all that adjustment, refinement? Learning is not merely something which is prescribed. Learning does not happen teacher-centered. Through the practice, we learn. Engaging in the practice is done through our methods: technique, timing, sequence, and repetition.